If you never get the power position right, you will never throw far.
Nice.
That's what we're talking about. Come on. Let's go.
Whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, be sure to go to our website and check out our free javelin course. This is where I'll answer all your questions from javelin technique, nutrition, to physical preparation. There's a few things to note on how to improve your power position. So what is the power position? Okay, you're in a unilateral stance with your block leg out in front of you and your trail leg behind you. You have your block arm out in front of you and your throwing arm behind you, and your center of mass is stacked between both legs, okay? With your block leg being in front of you and your trail leg being behind you, your center of mass is stacked pretty evenly between the two. You're gonna wanna have your chest a little bit proud and a little bit behind the block, right? You don't wanna be too far forward in the power position, but you also don't wanna be too far back, okay? Because if we're too far forward, that's gonna cause our block to collapse and us to throw really, really low at the ground and not get any height on the javelin. And then if we're too far behind it, we're gonna lean back too much and our energy is gonna stop at the block instead of getting through the block. And then we will throw and the javelin will be too high and not level enough. So you need to have that happy medium of being in that perfect position with your center of mass during the power position. The power position we know as the C position, right? The backward C position, I should say. Before the backward C position, we are going to be in a T position on back foot contact. And so what that T position is in back foot contact is when your lead arm is going to be out in front and then your throwing arm is going to be behind you. And this is before the block leg engages into the ground, okay? So when you're in that T position where you're really spread out, that's right before the backward C position, because the backward C position or the power position happens when your chest is already engaged and your arm is gonna be back, but it's gonna be starting to be engaged. So your arm might not be as long as it is during the crossovers and penultimate, but it's going to start coming forward a little bit by the chest and the shoulder engagement. You still wanna see that external rotation in your throwing arm, but your chest and your shoulder will start to engage the throw during the power position. And your left arm will start to be cleared down to the side rather than fully out in front of you. You know, in order to set up a good power position in the backward C position, you need to have a good T position. What that comes down to is allowing you to be reaching long with your lead arm and then reaching long back with your throwing arm. Okay, as we've talked about in other videos, our throwing arm mimics our lead arm. So if our lead arm is short or a chicken wing across our body like that, chances are that our throwing arm is going to be pre-bent and not have as much power and not have as long of a pull. So what that does is by having the left arm or the lead arm long out in front of you, depending on if you're a righty or a lefty, your lead arm long out in front of you, and then your throwing arm long behind you, that allows us to create really good tension across our chest and have a really long pull on the javelin so that when we go into that backward C position, our throwing arm will still be back. A lot of throwers have that tendency of their hip and their arm coming through at the same time, which is not good for the power position. The power position is when our hip is going to be forward and our arm is still back. And so if our arm and our hip are coming forward at the same time, you are not going to have the proper power and the proper technique in that power position. So it's important that we set it up with that T position and keeping that lead arm long and that throwing arm long behind us. So with the kinetic chain, as I've talked about in some other videos as well, just to sum it up briefly, that's where all of our energy built up from the approach is going to come into a halt at the power position. Okay, so all that energy is built up, and then it explodes into the power position, and then that's when all of it goes into all the energy then gets built up, explodes in the power position, and then all that energy that's built up and explodes goes into the throw, hopefully, if you're doing it right. Your block leg is gonna hit the ground, okay? So block arm and block leg are actively hitting the ground. As your hip is gonna be coming through on back foot contact, when that block leg hits the ground, the hip is then going to continue to rotate forward. And then as the hip continues to rotate forward, your core begins to rotate forward. As your core begins to rotate forward, your chest begins to engage forward. As your chest begins to engage forward, your shoulder begins to engage forward. While this is happening, your arm should still hopefully be back. And then as the shoulder gets engaged, your arm will then go from lay back to then into external rotation, and then into the throw, release, and then follow through. So if any part of that sequence is off, where your block leg is really bent, okay, or your center of mass is too far forward, or your hip and your arm come through at the same time, or your block arm is chicken winged across your body, or is flailed way open to the side, any break in that kinetic chain is going to cause a lack of power. So we want to have that perfect power position where our center of mass is in the perfect spot, nice and even in between our front and our back leg. Our back hip is engaged, our block leg is on the ground, our block arm is strong and cleared on the side. It's not gonna be across our body, it's not gonna be way back here, it should be like here relatively. And then as this is happening, our arm is still back. Okay, so that's the whole piece of the kinetic chain. Is the throw is the main part, but in order for the throw to be the most powerful part, it needs to be the last part of the throw. So everything else needs to be engaged forward and creating that tension and that power buildup in order for the throw to be the last piece. And then after the throw, if you're doing it properly, you'll see, your trail leg will come through and your energy will then chase in after the javelin. How you can tell if your energy going into the power position is off is if you hit the block, you stay, right? So you don't get through it, or you might hit the block and then swing around to the side and then start facing the side of the sector instead of chasing after the javelin down the runway. So with that being said, there's a lot of different ways you can train to improve this position. So number one is training in the unilateral stance. So we do a lot of reverse lunges, split squats, split squat jumps, dumbbell split squat jumps, all those different types of movements in that power position so that we get used to being, all right, block leg out in front of us, trail leg behind us, center of mass stacked. We'll do plyometrics in that position, we'll do strength training in that position, and we'll do mobility in that position to just get really comfortable and athletic in that position and allow our body to have the mobility, the strength, the stability, and the power to be in that position. And to be able to train in that position is important because rep after rep after rep, you're just essentially practicing that block position. So if you were doing all back squat or all regular vertical jumps and you were never in that unilateral stance, you're taking away from your sport-specific training. So the sport-specific training is important because that's where you're going. Any little insufficiency in your strength or your mobility will then be evened out by doing a lot of unilateral work. So even with my mobility, when I was younger, I would be really, really good at doing bilateral mobility. Anytime I would try to do a split or a unilateral movement, like a pistol squat or something, that area would be lacking. Just dedicate a lot of time to the unilateral work and then progress my way forward. Also, another key aspect is going to be making sure that your lower back and your hips are very mobile. So doing a lot of hip mobility and a lot of mobility for your psoas and your QL is essential because when you hit that block position, there's a lot of that force that's built up from the kinetic chain into the block. That energy is going to travel up into your lower back and your hips if you're not prepared to take that force upon impact. With the upper body mobility, when you hit that power position, what you're gonna do is you're gonna be having a combination of chest and shoulder mobility to keep your arm back, right? That's important and that's pretty obvious. What a lot of people neglect is the spine mobility because when you're hitting that power position, your chest is then going to be forward and your scaps are gonna be rolled back. You'll see it might be a little bit more noticeable in baseball because they're pitching down at a mound. So that position is a little bit more pronounced. But the same thing happens in javelin is when we hit that power position, when our hips are forward, our arm is back, we're engaging that chest, but we're also curving our spine while we're doing that. So doing a lot of spinal segmentation exercises like dead hangs, spinal segmented sit-ups, Jefferson curls, all of those are going to be key in order to have the proper mobility to hit that power position in your upper body and allow your upper body to do what it needs to do to keep the arm back and engage the chest and shoulder first. So it's very, very hard to engage the chest and shoulder first if everything's coming through at the same time like we talked about. So by being able to engage your hips first and curve your spine back and your scaps retracted, that's gonna allow you to engage your chest forward and keep your arm back. So if you don't have that ability to segment your spine one vertebrae at a time, you're not going to have that same power position effect with that backwards C, right? Because that backwards C is a lot of times, you know, you'll see it with your back leg and your arm. What that's doing is it's not just your back leg is back and then your back arm is back and then your torso is straight. Your torso should be rounded as well. And that's where that spine mobility comes from, okay? So making sure that you're training effectively in the physical preparation side is going to be essential for you to hit this power position in this backward C position. If you don't have the ability to be stable in a reverse lunge, or you don't have the ability to segment your spine or do a shoulder mobility exercise in the weight room or doing a mobility session, you're not gonna be able to do this when you're going full speed in a javelin throw in a competition. It's just not gonna happen. So you need to be able to physically prepare your body in order to do these movements for them to actually carry over onto the runway. All right, that's about it for this video. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked it, please like and subscribe and follow along for more.